Hello, everyone. My name is Paul, and welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone is having a great day, everyone's having a great night, and enjoyed their Saturday. Obviously, I want to apologize. There's a lot of fireworks going on in the background. I'm sure it sounds like a war zone, much to my displeasure here. But in the end, I hope that you guys are safe, that your friends and your family are safe, and if not, I find that safety and security in the very near future. So yeah, that's one of the reasons for the late start. But obviously, there's a lot of stuff currently going on around me. Um, there's a lot of news going on in the world. There's a lot of stuff that's happening worldwide. There's a lot of stuff that I mean, a lot of it's not good though, and that's just the sad reality when it comes to the news. Here is the fact that there's just not most of the stuff that makes the news just isn't all that great. But luckily, you guys have made this a great community, and we can help. You guys have made us have the ability to be the news that gives back, and that is the awesome thing. So if you guys go and you check out in the video description, you're going to see a ton of links down there. You're going to see a ton of stuff for Ukraine, of course, and you're going to see a bunch of stuff for other places as well. I want to highlight those other locations specifically because due to the war in Ukraine, a lot of places just don't get the highlight that they used to, and there are millions of people that are suffering within these regions. 90% of the Tigray region within Ethiopia requires humanitarian assistance just to survive. Within the Horn of Africa, children under the age of 5 are especially at risk for malnutrition and severe malnutrition and even death as a result. There's a 90% of Somalia has dried up in the worst drought in the last 40 years, and we're seeing a similar case inside of Iraq right now with the drought that's affecting the Tigris and Euphrates River, where over a third of fruit crops within the Diyala province have actually already been destroyed, and roughly 30% of the arable land in Iraq has been destroyed due to the drought. Overall, the situations just aren't great. So please make sure that you guys are checking out all of those. If you have more, we're constantly looking to add more to that list. And we have our Discord currently located in the description, as well as our official website that you guys can go and check out, and you guys can get in contact with the staff member, send us an email, or preferably shoot us a message on our Discord, and let us know if you have others. What are two main things that we go through, because we vet each of them independently, is we're making sure, one, of course, that it's an official organization. We're not trying to add to scammers. There's already enough of those when it comes to these situations. We don't want to contribute to that issue. So one, we make sure that we can go through that there's a history with the organization, that we're able to go through their records, their tax records, everything else, and see how that money is being spent, where it's going, how they're getting it, etc. But also 80% or more of all the organizations in the description, the donations they receive go directly to their programs, meaning that they actually go to helping people. We're not in the business here to try and pay someone's salary. So we're here to make sure that we're actually helping people. Less than 20% of all organizations in the description, their actual donations go to salaries, and less than 20% go to salaries and administration's costs. 80% or more is going to go to actually helping people. So please let us know if you have any organizations. We are constantly looking for more. And if you can't give a lot to these, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, give us a like and subscribe. Tell your friends about us, because the more people that are here, the more people can help us. One, they can enjoy the news, but two, and most importantly, the more people that are here, the more good we can do overall, and a much more meaningful impact we can have. We're never doing super chats here. We're never pushing merchandising. We're never doing any of that. Everything here, everyone is volunteering. I have a full-time job. I'm not worried about the money. What we're here to do is help people and deliver the news in an apolitical and unbiased fashion, or at least be very plain and open about what bias we do have. And with that, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump right into the news that we have going on worldwide, and starting with our special report, of course, in Ukraine. So, we don't have any news coming out of Kyiv or anything today, but what we do have is a lot of stuff coming out of the Donbass, which is really the meat and potatoes of the ongoing conflict within the country. And the first thing we have is, unfortunately, we're seeing more incendiary weapons usage here. This is up by Vyatogorsk. which is kind of near Slavyansk. It's in between Slavyansk and Zydogorsk here. This wooded area, this heavily wooded area that's very easy to see on the satellite images. And what this is they're using incendiary munitions, and they're basically spreading them throughout this entire region in order to destroy the forest and any Ukrainian forces that are within, as well as near these different settlements that are currently in and around these areas, such as Sidorov and Mazhaki. And we can see that here. So incendiary munitions like this are especially horrendous. These burn at thousands of degrees Fahrenheit, and there's no way to really put them out. They just will continue burning until the actual chemical reaction eventually ceases. There's no real way to put it out. It will melt through anything you try to use. It doesn't matter. And you can see this is being used over a very widespread area. You can see already burned out areas here in the background. You can see it just kind of raining down. This I don't believe this is white phosphorus. White phosphorus is a little bit different usually in its use. It could be from a distance. I just can't tell. And you see the massive fires that are erupting from this. And this is so normally we would say, right, like this is a war crime because it's being used for the purpose of destroying, either it's being used in a highly concentrated area or it's being used against personnel. And what this is actually still considered a war crime. This is just the destruction of the natural environment and resources, the unnecessary destruction of the natural environment and resources. So that is where that category actually falls under. Despite the fact it may not be a heavily populated area, it still is a populated area. However, as we can see the houses down here in the corner, kind of by where my cursor is. As you jump down here to Slavyansk, unfortunately, cluster munitions appear to have been used once again. And this is coming from Vadim Lake, who is the mayor of Slavyansk. And he stated in... quote, rocket attack on the city of Slavyansk in the Donetsk region on July the 1st. 4 people were killed, 7 citizens were injured. A private sector of the city was damaged. Russian aggressors used cluster shells banned by international conventions. It is banned by international conventions. Once again, Ukraine and Russia neither of them are signatories to those conventions. However, the use of cluster munitions in a highly populated area does still break Protocol 1 under the Geneva Convention, which is the requirement for... part of that covers basically the usage of weaponry inside of urbanized areas and highly populated civilian centers. And the thing is that military planners are required in order to mitigate collateral damage and collateral loss of life, and therefore failure to do so, such as the use of cluster munitions or inaccurate warheads in mass, would mean that they are not abiding by that within their very own planning processes, therefore hinting towards, once again, a war crime under the Geneva Convention. And we see all this done in Mariupol and Lysychans'k and also within Severodonetsk as well. Which, speaking of Lysychans'k, that's our next stop. As the main title of the video suggests, Ukrainian forces have indeed withdrawn. They withdrew overnight from Lysychans'k, and the city was officially captured by Russian forces today, successfully for the Russians, closing the pocket within the Luhansk here that was being held out. Ukrainian forces have withdrawn to a further front line. We're still trying to find more information so we can better tell where the front line currently is, but the Luhansk pocket is quickly closing. The 9 axes of advance are now going to probably converge in some areas on a pretty much a straight front, and we can expect the fall of probably the entirety of the Luhansk district here within the next few days, if not coming weeks, and that's just the unfortunate reality here. As a result, we can see some of the new front lines on the fire map, though, which gives us a good rough indicator here as to where these front lines now are, as Lysychansk has been captured. Pushes back past the pocket. And we can also see here where Russian forces have officially considered this area captured. So this is them celebrating. And they didn't just celebrate in the normal fashion, similar to that, very similar to some of the images that you see from World War II. Russia and the forces there are making heavy usage of former Soviet ideology and symbolism as they compare this war to the last Great Patriotic War, or what they consider, or what they would call World War II. They consider this a very similar ideology, following in their forefathers' footsteps. At least the Russian military does, and therefore they carry the hammer and sickle, and in victory they raise the hammer and sickle that they currently have, the 75th anniversary flag, over Lysychans'k at the city hall. So this is actually coming from RIA News, which is a Russian state-run media organization, meaning that it's owned by the government. There is no independent state news media sites coming, or there is no independent media sites coming out of Russia. All of it is now state owned, meaning that all of it is backed by the government. All of it is government, whatever they want to say, which just kind of goes into that whole authoritarianism thing that we have talked about here before on the channel, and we continue to talk about, intermittently. We have kind of a very sad thing here, and this is something that's really not okay. So a dog was saved by Ukrainian forces here, somewhere in the Donbass. And the thing is that Russian forces beat this dog, threw it into a trash pit, and then stuck a landmine underneath it. It has been rescued. I've seen pictures of where it's been rescued. And so the dog has survived. But, I mean, come on. I mean, seriously, like, this is the worst. This is quite the worst of humanity. You can see right there, that's a mine. That's an anti-personnel mine that they have put underneath this dog. That's ridiculous. Here in Popasna, or over by Popasna, we know of another Russian ammo depot that has been hit with Ukrainian artillery that successfully destroyed that ammunition depot has been successfully destroyed. However, the fact that they are targeting logistical centers in the Russian army, Ukraine has not been able to completely slow the Russian advance in the Luhansk region just because of the sheer concentration of Russian forces. And we can see that here. However, this has made their attempts at going towards Bakhmut they've really struggled to make any contributable advances over the last few weeks, and it's probably in contribution to the fact that most of their logistical centers have been hit by Ukrainian artillery, especially with the introduction of HIMARS into the country. We can see that here. However, this doesn't entirely mean that Bakhmut isn't still under an assault, and we can see that here where Bakhmut, according to Pavlo Krylenko, who is the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration, Russian troops shelled the city of Bakhmut in the Donetsk region on July 1st. 5 people were injured, including an 11-year-old child. Bakhmut is still under a steady advance. However, Russian forces haven't gotten close enough to Bakhmut to where they needed to shift their artillery fire in order to prevent friendly fire, blue on blue, or I guess in our personal case, a red on red. However, of course, the Kadarovites, they always come in here to give us a little bit of comedy. The Kadarovites, which they're Chechen fighters that follow Kadyrov. They're loyal to Russia. There's a very big difference between Chechens and Kadarovites. Both of them come from the same region. However, Chechens fought against Russia twice, the First and Second Chechen War. Kadarovites are pro-Russian Chechens. And they have been very affectionately named by the Western world as the quote-unquote TikTok army. They got this connotation when they are during the Battle of Mariupol, where they posted a bunch of videos supposedly showing that they were fighting when indeed they weren't. And it was more of just propaganda. They're literally there for propaganda purposes. Because of the First and Second Chechen Wars, the Chechen rebels gave anyone from Chechnya kind of this connotation of being a very ruthless, brutal, and very, and very mission-oriented fighting force, a very effective fighting force, when in reality Kadarovites took immense losses, or what would have been pro-Russian Kadarovites now, back in that period, took immense losses alongside Russian forces. So they continue to take immense losses anytime they actually find themselves in actual combat, and they're not exactly the most military savvy people I've ever met in my life. I shouldn't say I've ever seen in my life, because the backblast is certainly not clear. Backblast is something that occurs whenever you fire a rocket or a missile, and what it is it's a bunch of hot gases that get expelled out the back. Now, of course, this is a tube that you're firing this thing out of, whether that's an RPG or whether that's a tow missile or a javelin. You see a very large kind of, bowing out piece in the back of the tube, where a bunch of hot gases, as the rocket is fired forward by its motor, that rocket motor expels these gases out the back. And it causes several different things, and mostly it causes overpressure, which it can result from an explosion as well, which is why you see some people who are killed by an explosion that have no physical injuries. They likely died of overpressure. But this is why you can't really fire rockets and missiles indoors, at least not in a very, you can't just go in your grandma's bedroom and fire an RPG out the window, because the pressure that is expanded from the back of the RPG will actually bounce off of the walls behind you and will actually kill you with the overpressure. You have to find a large enough room. There are certain ways to do that. Most manuals will teach you how, what size of room you're allowed to fire this out of, depending on your weapon system. The javelin can be fired indoors, but there are certain criteria you have to meet, and it's best to open all windows and doors in order to allow the pressure to escape and at least be, reasonable. That's also why the back of a turret, for any American vehicle that carries the M41A7 Sabre system, which is the tow missile launcher that the United States currently uses, that's why the back parts of the turret within those vehicles, actually you can pull pins in them and it drops the back plates. That way the back blast doesn't get caught in the plate and shoot into the turret of the vehicle, killing the gunner and the crew inside. It's also really terrible to stand behind it. There's a range. It's a cone that fires out the back. And what ends up happening is there's several different things that can happen depending on where you're standing behind the system. But when it's fired, if you're standing behind it, or you are in a confined space that you can't be shooting this out of, you get one of several different things, if not multiple of several different things. You can have very severe burns from the hot gases. You can have traumatic brain injury, sometimes causing permanent damage. You can, of course, get hearing loss to varying degrees. You can get internal hemorrhaging, which means internal bleeding and destruction of internal organs. That's caused by the overpressure. Shrapnel, which is in case there's loose debris, so if you have glass shards that are laying on the ground because you busted out this window, that stuff will actually be kicked up. Or if you have any loose rocks or gravel or anything, that will be kicked up by the back blast and can be shot at your buddy behind him or behind the weapon system. And, of course, many of these things, to whatever degree, can lead to, of course, death. So remember, if you're shooting a rocket or a missile, make sure to clear your backblast and always yell "backblast clear" once you do so no one walks behind you. But these Kadarovites, in the end, learned very quickly that that wasn't a good idea. Remember, the back blast was not clear. If you jump down here, this is the city of Marinka, which is near Donetsk, and Russian forces shelled the Ukrainian-held city of Marinka, which damaged at least one apartment complex. That's all the information that we have at this point in time, but the casualties just are sitting at unknown at this stage. So let's take a look. We have this photo here, some of the destruction that recently occurred. Obviously, these are residential complexes. Russians are not using precision munitions against any of their targets. And that is resulted in an immense level of destruction and what can only be attributed to a systematic war, systematic war crimes, which when a war crime becomes something that is systematic, that is now attributed to a crime against humanity. That is the separation. A war crime is something an individual does. Crimes against humanity is something that was systematic and orchestrated. However, we get some vengeance here, or at least the Ukrainians do, as a Russian T-80 had a sympathetic detonation, meaning that its ammunition cooked off, essentially. Its ammunition and its fuel cooked off. As a result, after it was hit with a Ukrainian ATGM somewhere here along the Donbass front. So you can see here already, this is a Russian T-80. The best way you can tell that is, one, the suspension system that's on this thing. It's been detracked, obviously, by the initial blast. But you can also tell that from the giant snorkeling system on the back of the tank that goes over one of the hatches and allows it to ford in water and actually go underwater completely. But so you can see white smoke. This is coming out of the commander's hatch. You can tell because it's facing forward. And that white smoke means that it's burning inside. Tanks, T-72 and onward for the Russian Federation, so your T-72, all of its variants, the T-80 and the T-90, all use an auto loader. An auto loader means that you don't require a gunner. They have only 3 crew members in these tanks, and they have a much higher rate of fire than Western tanks do, depending on the training of the crew. The autoloader can fire up to 9 rounds a minute, but that means that roughly out of about 42 rounds that can be carried in the vehicle, 20-something of them, 20-ish of them, are actually located here in the base of the vehicle underneath the armor. And what ends up happening is when you puncture that, that means that all that ammunition is already prepped and it's exposed, meaning you get the sympathetic detonation. The turret on a T-80, T-72, and a T-90 is between anywhere between 7 to 9 tons. In a sympathetic detonation of a fully laden T-series tank, T-72 and onward, you will get an average, if it's fully loaded, you'll get an average height of about 20 to 50 feet. Of actual vertical height, of a sympathetic detonation. So this turret's gonna be gone when we're finished. So take a look. There's the turret. So what ended up happening? Well, what ends up happening is, so whatever missile struck this, it's burning inside, because ATGMs, they make a molten thing of copper that punches a tiny hole. This thing, for as big as a Javelin missile is, it only punches a hole about the size of an American quarter, an American 25-cent quarter. That's about as large as the hole is, because it's meant to, puncture through the armor. You're not going to do that with a big blast on the side, as cool as it may look. When it punches through this, it just spews hot copper and molten armor plating all over the inside of this tank, which burns the crew and everything inside of it. Well, this stuff starts dripping onto the ammunition, and it heats up the ammunition to the point that all it takes is one round to explode inside of the auto-rotating carousel. And that causes every single other piece of ammo to explode. When these go off, their shells are firing out, but they're firing out in every direction. So on the inside of the tank, you have tank shells now puncturing all of the internal armor plating of the vehicle, all detonating at the same time, which then sets off also the fuel storage within this thing and the unloaded ammunition within this vehicle that's currently being carried inside of its own armored capsule, meaning that the ammunition which isn't even readied is going to detonate at the same time too, microseconds behind it, which is usually why things get flung one way or the other, not just straight up. is because it's being held in a different section. So you have a force directly underneath the turret. You also have a force somewhere on on the side of a turret or behind the rear of the turret, which flings this thing. Well, it flings it right there. Once again, you get about 20 to 50, I'd say about 20 to 100 feet, actually, depending on how full you actually chalk this thing. But that's the turret. Because the only thing holding the turret down is its own weight. Down here in Mariupol, we get a little bit less of a joyful experience, and that's because Ukrainian this is a statement coming from the press service of the Mariupol City Council. This is the Ukrainian Mariupol City Council, not the occupational government. And they are saying, quote, more than 10,000 Ukrainian civilians from Mariupol have been detained by Russian occupiers and are now in Russian prisons in the occupied territory of Donetsk region. What they're doing is they are using what's called the filtration camp or filtration point system. The largest one that we know of is over here, actually pretty close to the city of Mariupol, in the city of Bezymene. We don't know exactly where around Bezymene it is. I would like to get satellite footage of it if we possibly could, but that's kind of hard to come by. Maxar, all that stuff is really, really expensive, and we can't afford it at this point. But the one near Bezymene reportedly can hold up to 100,000 Ukrainians. If you're talking about Mariupol, your average resident of Mariupol, on top of the fact that you survived, which I think is a worse thing than death when it came to Mariupol, I think surviving is more atrocious than just being killed by the shelling. Those that died in Mariupol were the lucky ones, let me tell you. But there's a cholera outbreak. There's essentially little to no humanitarian assistance. You have no running water. And the water that you do have has been poisoned by the rotting, decomposing bodies of those trapped under the rubble. That they're slowly turning into puddles as they decompose, and it's seeping into every nook and cranny, including all of the shell craters collecting this rainwater. And then there is no gas, no electricity, no running water, no sanitation, no nothing. You're under occupation. There's essentially systematic rape, torture, summary execution, disappearances, and suppression. They're being forced to work, and bury the thousands of dead. If you die of what's quote-unquote natural causes, you get to sit out and rot in the sun for a while until they build you a coffin out of some blown-up garage. If you died under the war, under the shelling, you're sent to one of what's at least 3 mass grave sites that have thousands of people. You don't get a name or anything. You just get a number, and you're chucked in a mass grave. No coffin. And you have to carry around, if you're not deported, if you're not just forcefully deported or arrested and detained and sent to a filtration camp, you have to carry around filtration paperwork, which essentially looks like the papers the Nazis gave people in the Warsaw Ghetto in Poland. You have to carry it around to move between different districts of the city, as there's multiple checkpoints set up throughout the area. There is systematic rape and torture and everything else within this region. To die in Mariupol was the merciful thing. It's terrible. And 10,000 Ukrainians have had to be deported to a filtration camp, which is only closely best described as a concentration camp. Once again, torture, summary execution, systematic rape, sleeps and sanitation, and sanitary deprivation, lack of water, lack of food, lack of everything. Clothes, you name it. It does not follow the Geneva Conventions. It was also used, the filtration camp or filtration point system was also used by the Russians during the First and the Second Chechen Wars, and people have actually been tried for war crimes in the early 2000s in the International Court of Justice as a result of what they did at these facilities. Go over here into Melitopol, where we just received, not too long before we started the stream, that explosions were happening near Melitopol. They're being reported at this point. We don't know. This could be partisan activity or it could be HIMARS. We simply have no idea. But what we do know is that it is happening. So we can take a look here.
Охереть.
Охуеть, гля.
Сейчас громко будет. Отойди от окна, сам же мне говоришь.
Серый горит. Глянь, горит все.
Еще вон.
Это по нам хуярят.
Pretty large explosions, but if I had to take a guess as to what was being hit and what was being targeted, I would have to say that it would be the airport. Because the airport here in Melitopol is probably being used as an air base. So that's probably a major staging point for Ukrainian or for Russian forces. It probably has a lot of aircraft there. It probably has a lot of supplies. It's a command and control center for them. There's probably a lot of troops barracked there. If I had to guess as to where this is happening, I'm going to guess and say it's probably a strike against the airport. Judging by the explosions and the amount of them, I would have to say it's probably HIMARS rather than partisan activity, because HIMARS are going to have that range to actually reach out and touch this. We know they already have done that similar locations and ammunition depots in the past, but as Ukrainians get more and more comfortable with using those weapon systems and then become more and more accurate with them and more timely in how they fire them and can pinpoint Russian locations, then we're going to see a lot more probably, long distance, much more strategically important targets being hit outside of just your basic logistic infrastructure, but more command and control centers that were previously unreachable. As we jump up here, this is the small village of Ivanivka, which has been liberated by Ukrainian forces. This is within the Kherson Oblast. There is another one in the far south, on the other side of the Dnipro River, that is called Ivanivka, which is over here. That has to be confusing for anyone living in the Kherson Oblast, that there are two cities named this. But Ivanivka here in the north was liberated. And this is coming from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The Armed Forces of Ukraine have liberated the village of Ivanivka in the Kherson region. We did have to adjust our map previously yesterday because we just don't have a lot of information coming out of this region. There's just not a lot on either side of the conflict within the Kherson Oblast. And we adjusted that map based off of other cross-reference materials we could find. We haven't changed the map at all since, and it seems that we are pretty close to what we were trying to depict here. So I'm going to say this is fairly accurate. I wouldn't say completely. These battle lines, these front lines are only to give you kind of an example, a kind of a reference point. Keep in mind, this stuff is like a guitar string is the best way I can describe it, where this stuff is constantly moving and shifting one way and the other all day, every day, 24/7, 365 here on the front lines. This is a very fluid situation. It's more like water in a glass. It's constantly moving and shifting as you walk around. And so nothing anybody you will ever see is going to have an accurate depiction of the map. It's just an accurate depiction for what we can tell on the ground. But small unit leadership and large scale movements and concentrations are going to constantly be, changing as with the rest of anything else when it comes to warfare. These forces are attempting to outmaneuver each other and essentially close with and destroy each other in a effective manner and an efficient manner. We can see here that PHC's 2000s, which are essentially the German version of the M109 Paladin self-propelled artillery gun, are currently in use on the front lines already. We have a video today of that coming from Ilya Ponomarenko, who is an independent reporter with the Kiev Independent. And they use the standard NATO 155 millimeter shell. I've talked about this before, but I actually want to run some numbers. So I did some quick numbers with a comparison between the M109, which is pretty much the base standard, mobile self-propelled gun platform. But really, you can apply this to any 155 millimeter gun because they all use the same ammunition, and therefore they have very similar ranges, to the 2S3, which is the Russian equivalent of the M109 Paladin. It is a it's a Soviet self-propelled gun. It fires 152 millimeter projectiles, 152.4 millimeters to be exactly. And on average, you're talking about a weapon system. So the NATO weaponry outranges Russian artillery. And that's a very important thing. Standoff distance matters when it comes to combat. That's why you always want to try and outrange your opponent, especially with heavy anti-armor weapons. That's why tow missiles outrange the main guns of 95% of tanks, because a tank's main gun has a maximum effective firing range of about 4 kilometers or 4,000 meters, which is the basic 120 millimeter smoothbore main gun. 125 millimeter main guns, you reach out and touch somebody a little bit further, as well as if they're rifled. But that's the basic main gun for every tank. Tow anti-tank system, or tow anti-tank missile, usually, depending on the variant, exceeds that range or comes very close to it. But on average, between the 155 millimeter NATO weapons, NATO artillery, versus the 152 millimeter Russian artillery, the NATO artillery outranges the Russian artillery with between, depending on the ammunition variant being used, between 5.5 and 16 kilometers. So that means Russian artillery have to move closer well within their effective range of this artillery to even begin to shoot back against Ukrainian artillery that's been provided by NATO countries. So that's why it's so important that they have this 155 millimeter weaponry. While Russia has tenfold the amount of artillery usage that Ukraine does, they have to get a lot closer to use it, and that puts their artillery systems at very high risk for being targeted and destroyed by Ukrainian artillery. But anyway, let's take a look at this PHZ 2000. And keep in mind, different artillery, there are different types of artillery that they have, or artillery rounds that both sides can use. You have rocket-assisted artillery shells. You have, precision guidance shells that NATO weapons can use. And you also have your just basic conventional HE, AP and all of that. Down here in Kherson Oblast, we have a couple of different things, and this is by Chernobivka, where heavy fighting was very visible from Chernobivka. A very large explosion was rocked outside Chernobivka. In fact, Russian forces reportedly have set up positions within 3 kilometers of the airfield. We don't know how accurate that is, but you can very much see the fighting going on from the city of Chernobivka itself. Chernobivka is it's a village basically on the outskirts of the city of Kherson. It's part of the greater Kherson metropolitan area. Same thing with Stepanivka and Zelenivka, Zemevinik, Antonivka. All of this right here is basically like one giant city. It's just this is the outskirts and it's called something else. This actually sits right next to the Kherson International Airport, which we've seen hit multiple times before. But just take a look at this. This is pretty massive. So this is a massive explosion and a massive, raging fires that are happening as a result of the ongoing fighting outside of the city. So we know Ukrainian forces have a bulge in this general vicinity. We don't know how significant it is in totality, but we do know is that Ukrainian forces are pushing ever so closer towards Kherson itself and putting a lot of pressure on Russian forces. They're trying to stop them, and now they're effectively within reach of Kherson with their artillery, as we saw yesterday. However, the propaganda machine is in full swing within Kherson itself, as the occupational government is having preschoolers do patriotic quote unquote activities, such as making Russian flags and writing letters to Russian soldiers. Pretty abhorrent propaganda campaign overall. We saw this in Russia, now we're seeing it here within the Kherson Oblast. there's quite nothing more than purposefully using children in these efforts. You know, yesterday we saw that Ukraine was teaching children not to touch unexploded ordnance left because of the war. Meanwhile, down here in Kherson, the children are being taught, love Russia and hate the Ukrainians and all this stuff. All that wonderful stuff, it's the second great patriotic war, but that's fine because it now seems that Kherson's annexation appears to be less and less possible with each passing day. According to the U.S. Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines, said the Kremlin quote unquote faces rising partisan activity in southern Ukraine, posing a challenge to Russia's attempt to control the region. According to CNN, another U.S. official said Russia likely does not have sufficient forces in the Kherson Oblast, especially considering the dedication of troops in the Donbass, specifically up here near the Luhansk region where they have the main concentration of troops. So Russia continues to terrorize civilians here in the Odessa region with Kh-22 missiles, which is an air-launched missile system. It's about 60 years old. 20 dead and 38 wounded are a result of the strike that occurred yesterday on an apartment building and recreational center in a small town outside of Kiev, or outside of Odessa, sorry. Another one was shot down in Kiev as it was approaching the city. And then also we get here from Sergei Bratchuk, who is the spokesman of the Odessa Regional Military Administration, who stated on July 1st, Ukrainian air defense forces shot down a Russian missile in the Odessa region. We're getting this from a number of different sources. And we can see here some of those cleanup efforts. Just an immense amount of destruction that has occurred here. And that one I believe we showed yesterday. There's just a massive cleanup effort when it comes to this. So it's a before and after photo of the recreation center. So it's before and that's now. And it's just completely destroyed. Down here on Snake Island, Ukraine has released additional footage from TB2 Bayraktars from their last strikes on the island that pushed Russian forces off of the island successfully. So let's go ahead and take a look. So you can see here that they're getting ready to hit some M1RS systems that are located here on the port. Looks like it's a BM-21 Grad system. And they've been using their Air Force to pretty significant results here, as well as shorebound artillery strikes on the location. But pretty significant. Of course, we do know that Russian forces have retreated off of Snake Island, meaning it has been liberated by Ukrainian forces. But it actually wraps up all of the news inside of Ukraine. But trust me, there's plenty of news outside of Ukraine too. And so we actually go ahead and we start and jump up over here into Belarus, where Belarus states that Ukraine fired missiles at its cities. Alexander Lukashenko, who is he's the president, quote unquote, he's the dictator of Belarus. He's even called himself the dictator of Belarus. had on a meeting regarding the Independence Day on Belarus says Minsk does not want to fight in Ukraine. There is not a single Belarusian soldier there. And this is said as doctors are currently being banned from leaving the country and military exercises continue along the border. He also proceeded to claim that Belarus military had intercepted Ukrainian missiles fired at Belarus. And this is coming as rumors are circulating that senior officers are pleading to prevent war and Russian intervention in the Belarusian sovereignty. So this is an official letter from multiple high-level Belarusian officers, reportedly. Belarusian soldiers there on the border. Once again, breaking news. Lukashenko accuses Ukraine of firing missiles on Belarus, according to state-run media agencies. That's not the only thing. Here in Belgorod, there were several explosions that rocked the city of Belgorod, and we can see here when an explosion so the explosion as a result was a result of failed training. Let's see here if I can fix that link. Oh, guess not. So we can see that here. So there was a lot of Russian news media regarding this, and we can see that here.
О, две сразу, офигеть. Ого!
So we do know that Russian anti-air systems are active over Belgorod.
Среди ночи.
Опа, бахнуло.
Среди ночи начали их выпускать. Блять, они что, получается, с аэропорта где-то выпускают.
Да, может быть, было... Ну,
Блять, звук.
Сейчас дойдет. Еще один.
Не куришь, нет, царей. Выскочил, детей попрятал в подвал.
Moral of the story with that, though, is the fact that Russia doesn't really have anything that's effective at this point. Most of their stuff is rather ineffective militarily with their equipment, which has been completely degraded. They've run out of most of their actually good munitions. They're pulling from pretty horrendously old and outdated stockpiles that probably are no longer stable or safe to use. However, here up in Vilnius, this is according to the Vice Minister of Defense, which his name is Margiris Abrukavicius. Lithuania has suffered 11 days of constant DDoS attacks from Russia. This is technically a type of cyber warfare. DDoS, for those that don't know, I mean, I'm sure you've heard of what it is on the internet to an extent, but it stands for Distributive Denial of Service Attack. And this is in which multiple sources, usually multiple servers, computers, send a bunch of files, useless files, over to a server or a website, essentially. So if you get a bunch of computers and you make a code, you can send a bunch of pointless files, because that's how the internet talks to each other. You send a file, you receive a file. Now your normal computer will send X amount of files, but what happens is you can write a program and you can use multiple computers essentially multiple servers, and you can send a bunch of files to a website, for instance. And this is super oversimplified. And it causes it to run that website it can't process everything it's being sent. So it slows down to where it's almost unusable if it doesn't just end up being completely overloaded and it completely just fails and it just goes offline. So that's how a DOS attack or a DDoS attack actually works. It's just a bunch of files being sent to a website or a server that it can't process fast enough, and it overloads it, and then it eventually either just stops being usable or it just completely goes offline. And once again, this is coming from Margiris Abravicius. And if you want to learn more, Microsoft actually has a thing regarding cybersecurity. You jump over here into Vienna, Austria, where Ukraine is preparing to accuse Russia. So we hit on this yesterday with RIA News. This is essentially the exact same thing that came from RIA News. Kid you not, almost word for word, the exact same thing. Except this is in regards to the attack that was used, in Odessa. Is the thing, regarding Odessa and the hit that Odessa took. When it came to the KH-22, or also known as the X-22 missiles that, hit those locations. And it's, for once, or I shouldn't say for once, but the Russian propaganda machine has really slowed down, it would seem, as it's 2 days now since this strike has occurred, or really has truly passed at this point. And take a look at this. This is their statement from the Russian embassy, here, and the Russian delegation to Vienna, and it says, Ukraine is preparing another provocation in Odessa for accusing the Russian armed forces for assassination of civilians, including minors, and deliberately destroying civilian infrastructure using cluster munitions prohibited by international agreements. The participants of the staged scenes are to be paid $500. Really? Is that so? Because that's the exact same thing that RIA News had stated. They stated that yesterday. They stated that yesterday, 13 hours after the attack actually happened. So they're not quite hitting their mark on that. I think someone's probably going to lose their job. But that is Russia basically preparing to properly report on this in their own special way to whoever their viewers are, which would be everyone in Russia, since there isn't any independent media. Down here, this is in Lugano, Switzerland, and this is where Ukraine is preparing to present its reconstruction plan to private, corporate, and national leaders and dignitaries. So they're going to hold a conference here in Lugano where they are going to present their post-war reconstruction plan to rebuild Ukraine after the war is over. And this is coming officially from President Zelensky's website as the president of Ukraine regarding this. So he goes through and he talks about there are 1,027 cities and towns which they have managed to liberate, and another 2,610 are under Russian occupation. He's talking about the large scale project, so they're preparing it. They haven't completed that, but they will be presenting it here in the next few days regarding that. So yeah, very fun indeed. And So here we have a better understanding. Sorry, there was something happening in the chat I needed to remove. So anyway, so here we have a better understanding regarding how this process works when it comes to being a NATO country, or not a NATO country, but an EU country. So there has been a lot of talk, obviously, because of Moldova and Ukraine specifically becoming a member of, a candidate member of the EU. And a lot of people have talked about, well, there's still a long way to go. Like, what's next? Like, how does this work? There's a lot of, different takes on it. But the EU and the EU Parliament has actually provided us kind of like a way to understand how this works. So this is coming off of the EU Parliament's official Twitter. And we can see the steps that it takes to actually become a EU country. So step one is you become an applicant country, which means that the European Commission gives its opinion to all existing EU countries, have to agree in order to be, and that from there they become a candidate country. After negotiations and screenings, the candidate adopts EU rules and policies, which is what Ukraine has been doing, and the Commission publishes its final opinion. And finally, 3, the accession treaty, which is prepared, which means the Parliament gives its consent to all EU countries and all existing EU countries approve, and the EU countries and candidate countries sign and ratify the accession treaty, meaning it's put to a vote within the country, and all of them say yes, and at that point they become a brand new country. The current candidate countries are Turkey since 1999, North Macedonia since 2005, Montenegro since 2010, Serbia since 2012, Albania since 2014, and of course Ukraine and Moldova since this year. The potential candidates and other applicants include Bosnia-Herzegovina, Kosovo, and Georgia. So the EU Parliament is the one that really facilitates all of that. They're not the only part of the EU which has been working on this issue, or that has been working with issues regarding Ukraine, though. And that's because the European Court of Human Rights, the ECHR, releases some interim measures regarding Mariupol POW. So what this was is the fact that the wife of a Ukrainian POW from Mariupol, Lysychans'k, he was a small unit leader that was captured during the battle. And upon Mariupol's surrender to Russian forces, he hasn't been released, and the ECHR has released interim measures regarding this, and this is coming from them. So basically, his wife sent this applicant over, or this application for measures to be taken, and a case to be taken by the ECHR of Lysychans'k versus Russia and Ukraine. And all they ruled was that under Rule 39 that they needed to make sure that both countries were abiding by the Geneva Convention and the treatment of prisoners of war. Here comes the problem, though, because it doesn't matter what the ECHR says to Russia, because Russia, as of this year, as of, I believe, early June the 1st, actually put in what was called a non-implementation law, which means that under Russian law, what was passed and signed, passed by the Russian Duma and signed by President Vladimir Putin, Russia no longer recognizes the ECHR as a court body in any of their cases. They no longer consider them as being having any meaning within Russia. They will not implement any decisions or any verdicts or cases that were conducted by the European Court of Human Rights within Russian soil. You jump up here into Brussels, where NATO has publicly released their 2022 strategic concept. So I actually did poll. I actually went to, of course, to NATO's official Twitter, where they stated, hey, this is our strategic concept 2022. This is what their entire summit within Madrid was supposed to be about. That's really the big wide scale thing that was the point of the summit. And we can see that here. So this is from their official website, the 2022 NATO strategic concept. and you can actually go down here and download it yourself. I also have a link. We upload our map to our website every single day. You can actually go there and check it out. I have a link, so I have a free Google Drive document where you can take a look at the PDF. It's 16 pages long, and you can read the entire strategic concept regarding how NATO plans on operating from 2022 onward until they have to reassess their strategic concept. So you guys can go and check all of that out once again. But pretty cool that was publicly released. You jump down here in Damascus as we jump into other international news, where the Syrian-Iranian alliance is starting to really grow there. The Syrian regime president Bashar al-Assad met with the foreign minister of Iran, Hussein Amir Abdullahian, who is in his diplomatic envoy, as they are planning on strengthening and deepening their alliance. Both countries are known to be brutally suppressing their people. In Syria's case, they actually gassed their own people using chlorine gas and other methods. And so the other thing is that they have very anti-Western ideologies and they have very deep political ties with Russia. In fact, Syria is a ally of Russia. The Russian Federation Southern Command operates within Syria and assisted with their use of the bombing in Aleppo and Idlib, and actually they together did several different efforts against the Syrian Democratic Forces, but they facilitated. The Russians assisted in the facilitation of the use of chemical weapons and actually planned and used the chemical weapons along with the Syrian forces. Iran, of course, is trying to build up its nuclear weapon arsenal. They currently don't possess any nuclear weapons, and that's what the whole Iran nuclear deals are about, because Iran is trying to do that. Iran is a theocracy under the rule of the supreme leader, also known as the Ayatollah, not to be confused with the president of Iran or the prime minister of Iran. The supreme leader is above all of that, and so. The thing is that both of these governments not only have, to tell you how big their anti-Western sentiments are, in February 2018, the pro-Assad regime militia forces, alongside the Russian Wagner Group fighters, engaged U.S. forces in Deir ez-Zor province here in Syria. While in 2020, Iran fired 7 theater ballistic missiles, or TBMs, which struck Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq, and also U.S. facilities up in Erbil, where U.S. troops were located during the early part of 2020 in response for the killing of General al-Soleimani, after Iranian-backed Kataib Hezbollah started protests and almost overran the U.S. embassy in Baghdad, right there on Al-Kindi Street. So they said that their alliance and strengthening that alliance would be beneficial in the face of Western world domination, and this is all coming from Bashar al-Assad's personal verified Twitter account, which you can go and take a look at here. And this is also confirmed by the Iranian government. This is the official government Twitter of Iran. As you jump over here, we have an update regarding the earthquake in Iran. It was a 6.1 earthquake on the Richter scale, and at least 5 people have died up until this point, confirmed, with another about 44 injured. So we continue to receive updates. A lot of news is playing catch up regarding to this. Once again, there's a lot of it a lot of it is state-run media in Iran, as they are kind of an authoritarian regime. So we don't know how much information. So a lot of it's playing catch up. We're talking about 48 hours worth of information here when we're talking about this. So. As you jump up here into Uzbekistan, unfortunately, the protests have kind of gone downhill. And they've grown significantly as Uzbekistan is planning on changing the constitution of the nation. A state of emergency has been announced from July 3rd through August the 2nd as mass protests have begun all over Uzbekistan regarding the constitutional reforms. And it basically eliminates a broad autonomy of the country's largest region, which is Karakalpakstan, which the changes, if they're adopted, the republic will lose its right to secede from Uzbekistan itself. Currently, the protesters are flooding the street, flooding to the city administration building, and supposedly an assault has been planned. We've seen a military buildup of Uzbekistani forces. We've also seen where Uzbekistani security forces have opened fire on protesters. And we do have an entire section under this one, which we're not going to show here on the stream, but you guys are happy to view it yourselves, where we actually cover that. So, but we do know that they have opened fire on protesters with live ammunition. But these are pretty massive protests, to say the least. So reportedly, the president of Uzbekistan did try to leave at the airport, or did try to, go into the city of Nukus here, where they, according at least to a flight radar, reportedly their goal is to seize power there. You can also go check out Reuters has a bunch of stuff on this, but there is just an immense amount of violence and police brutality within this region. They did say that they were going to scrap the autonomy thing, but we don't know how true that is at this point. As you jump over here to Islamabad, we can see U.S. ambassadors and the U.S. ambassador to Pakistan, the Pakistani Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, actually met in Islamabad today. They spoke at length regarding their different credentials and prior works as they were meeting for the first time, and so they're talking about strengthening bilateral relations between the country. So the reason why that's happening is because Imran Khan who was the prior prime minister before he was ousted from power with a vote of no confidence, he basically stated that he basically wanted to move away from U.S. sentiments. He was very U.S. anti-Western, and Shahbaz Sharif is currently trying to rebuild those relationships with the United States. And jump over here into Beijing, where Beijing and China have officially decided to weigh in on the disinformation campaign. Quote, this is from the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesman Zhao Lijian, who stated, quote, in order to hide the atrocities it committed during the war from the world, the U.S. military invented a whole set of narratives which calls civilian casualties collateral damage, murders, key operations, extorting confessions by torture, enhanced interrogation techniques, and killing civilians, wasting the enemy. Of course, this is coming from the Chinese, because everything in China is state-run. It's the last bastion of communism, except for Russia now. It's coming from the Chinese news agency. So here's the thing. China is also an ally of Russia, and they're really building those relations. China also has a lot of anti-Western sentiments. The best way I could probably explain it would be, I would say it's probably a closer relationship than Germany and Japan had during the Second World War. But they are, I would say, probably, if you were going to compare them to the axis of evil, they would probably be Russia and China are the Germany and Japan of the 21st century. Both have very big expansionist ideologies. Both of their expansionist ideologies don't conflict with each other, but what they do is they expand out in their respective regions. With a similar kind of style. Russia is doing it militarily, while Russia is really doing it economically, while they're building up their military force. In the last about decade, China had went from having one of the smallest navies in the world to now having the largest surface fleet in the world. But China is really starting to weigh in a lot more, and there's also a lot more rhetoric regarding Taiwan and the taking over Taiwan. In fact, China just signed, Xi Jinping, who's the head of China, the leader of China, actually just signed a new document regarding the usage of the military in peacetime, quote unquote, including special military operations. Very similar rhetoric to what Russia had. There's also warnings to Japan from this very same thing regarding that Japan needed to think very carefully about expanding NATO influence into the Pacific. Here, as we jump down here to Australia, diphtheria returns, unfortunately. Diphtheria, which was eradicated by vaccinations globally almost a century ago, has been reported with a case out of New South Wales where a 2-year-old girl is currently sitting in intensive care at a local hospital as the first case of diphtheria in almost a century. The general director of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, emphasized that this is the reason why vaccinations are so important, to prevent further infections and to prevent the resurgence of eradicated diseases which ravaged our very own ancestors. We can see this coming from the doctor's very own Twitter here. As we move deeper into the Pacific, RIMPAC 2022 has begun. RIMPAC, also known as the Rim of the Pacific, is one of the largest military exercises in the world. In fact, it's the largest maritime military exercises in the world. It includes 25,000 troops, 38 surface ships, 170 aircraft, 30 unmanned systems, all from 26 separate nations. This is a biennial exercise that builds cooperation amongst Pacific nations and the United States to combat tensions growing in the Pacific and also improve should an outbreak of war occur within the region. There are fleet movements, force-on-force exercises, as well as large-scale amphibious landings as well to practice island-hopping campaigns. And this is announced by the U.S. Navy's Twitter. Also, we know of a Nimitz-class carrier groups that have moved into Joint Base Pearl Hickam currently as participants within the RIMPAC exercise. And that'll run for some time. This is the public release from the Office of the U.S. Navy. They did, while this stuff announced officially on the 29th, their official Twitter announced this today. Which leads us over here into North America as we've traversed the entire Pacific today. As here in Washington, D.C., the president has officially submitted formal letters to Congress requesting the ratification of Finland and Sweden in the process of joining NATO. And we have both of the official statements coming from the White House. Dear Mr. Chairman, or Dear Madam Chair, I am providing the report on the Republic of Finland's accession to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization prepared consistent with sections 3, 2E, 2 of the Resolution of Advice and Consent or Ratification of the Protocols to the North Atlantic Treaty of 1949, the accession of Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic of April 30th, 1998. Sincerely, Joseph R. Biden Jr. And once again, similarly regarding the Kingdom of Sweden's accession. So, very good. That pretty much kickstarts the process for the United States to ratify Finland and Sweden becoming full-fledged NATO members, and that should occur rather quickly. And to wrap up our day here, we jump over here back into the United Kingdom, where a 2,000-year-old Iron Age death pit was discovered. It's an Anglo-Saxon burial site that contained the bodies of women, children, as well as parts of an array of animals located at this site. This is hopefully going to give us some new insights onto how the Anglo-Saxons lived during this time period, as these are really truly the Dark Ages. And, so we're talking about period of time where there's just not a lot of evidence as to what occurred, how their way of life was. Anglo-Saxon history is very limited in its scope just because of a lack of information and archaeological evidence. So hopefully that will turn some of that stuff around. So that's pretty cool to see that stuff on the archaeological side. I'm a very big fan of history, if you guys can't tell. While I may be pretty well versed in certain subjects, I'm not very well versed overall. I would say I just have a general understanding of these things. So I hope that you guys enjoyed all of this, though, because that does officially wrap up all of the news that we have today in the world. And so, once again, you guys can actually go and check out and interact with these maps now. This one has already been posted to our website. If you guys want to follow up with any of this stuff, if you guys want to read the NATO accession treaty, once again, I made that a public PDF document that you guys can just pull up and view. You don't have to download anything from NATO or whatever. But I have all of that there. You guys can go onto there and check it out. It's under our works. And then, of course, we also are here because obviously there's not a lot of good things happening in the world. We go out of our way to find good or interesting things happening when it comes to the news because we need something uplifting. Trust me, this researching for this is depressing. You guys only see about 10 to 25% of what we actually see when we're researching. Most of it is a lot of gore and death and destruction and suffering, and we don't want to just, well, one, YouTube won't let us show that, and two, we don't want to we don't want to bring everyone's mood down with that. But the important thing is that we can help those very same people that are affected by this tragedy, by these tragedies and these crises ongoing throughout the world. You guys have built an awesome community here, and I can't thank you guys enough. You guys have made this so that way we can be the news that gives back, and that's the whole point of this project. Of course, we want to deliver the news, and we want to do it, but we want to do it for a good reason. We're never doing super chats on this channel. We're never doing any of that. 100% of everything we do, all the time that we volunteer and everything that we do for this project is going to be going towards fundraising. If you check out the description below, you're going to see a ton of different links down there. A lot for Ukraine, and we're always trying to find some for different crises that are going on throughout the world. And we have two different things that we search for in these as we go through and we independently vet them. The first thing we look for, of course, is the fact that it is an official organization that is credible. We want to make sure that you, as our viewers, aren't getting scammed. Of course, the best prevention from that is to educate yourself, in which case we've also provided the links for the FBI's internet fraud links. It's also on our Discord if you guys want to read more about that. But make sure you're protected, but we had to make that attempt here as well when we go through and we vet these projects. We can look at their financial history, we can look at their tax reports, we can look at all of that, we can vet them as charities. And second thing is that 80% or more of all of those organizations, their donations, 80% or more of those donations that you give them go directly to their programs, so they're actually doing good, they're helping people. Only 20% or less go to those salaries and administration costs. We want to help people. We don't want to pay someone's salary. So those are the two main criteria that we look for. If you have any additional ones, please get please get in contact with a staff member. That way we can send them, the link to the charity and some information about what they do. And we would like to get that process started for more. We're constantly looking to add more charities, not just for Ukraine, but for regions all around the world. So if you have some, especially in regions we don't cover at this point, we would love to know, and we'd love to try and get those vetted and added to this channel so we can help people in those regions as well. And keep in mind, outside of Ukraine, these other locations are suffering as a result of the war in Ukraine. There's quite a ripple effect. I recommend looking at the World Food Program's Twitter and their website, so that way you guys can go and check out some of the information they're putting out regarding this. As one, they aren't getting as much spotlight. They've seen a significant reduction. Some of them, Yemen, for example, saw a reduction of I believe it was $82 million in the last year of donations, because a lot of that went to Ukraine in order for humanitarian assistance. The Tigray region, 90% of the Tigray region of Ethiopia requires humanitarian aid for survival, and the first International Committee of the Red Cross convoy of humanitarian aid just got to the Tigray region yesterday. So please make sure that you give everyone your attention, especially those that currently aren't in the spotlight, that because of the war ongoing in Ukraine and the tragedy going on there. But other than that, I hope you guys have a wonderful night. I once again apologize for all the fireworks going off in the background. Not my idea of what I prefer. I have a hard time with fireworks these days, but nonetheless, I hope that you guys remain safe. If you guys are celebrating 4th of July, I know 75% of my viewers are from the United States. If you're celebrating the 4th of July, please be sure that you are being very safe with these fireworks and being courteous. As of last year, back in 2021, 15,500 people had to go to the hospital as a result of injuries from fireworks. So please make sure that you're being safe with those fireworks. They are explosives, so please make sure be mindful, especially if you have young ones running around there. So other than that, please be courteous to your neighbors. There may be someone like me who has a hard time with that kind of stuff. But other than that, I hope you guys have a fun and safe weekend. I hope that you guys enjoy the rest of your night and the rest of your day tomorrow. Tomorrow is Sunday. I hope that you guys are being safe, that your friends and your family are safe. And if not, I hope you find that safety and security in the very near future. I really don't want any of my viewers to be going through that kind of stuff. I mean, I report on this. I really don't need any of you guys going through these very same situations. But if you are, I hope that you guys help. I hope that you guys get the help that you need. Other than that, that's going to be it for the night. So have a wonderful night, everyone. My name is Paul from the New News, and have a great night. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye now.